Hi, this is Steve Hefter. I'm here backstage at Ram's Head, on stage in Annapolis, Maryland, with Mr. Rod Morgenstein. Rod, thanks a lot for your time.
Great to be here.
So you're here with Jazz is Dead tonight?
Yeah, first time that we're kind of back together with this lineup in probably 12 years or so.
Why the hiatus?
You know what? There came a point in my life where, and I think a lot of musicians do, you think when you start in your first band, that's going to be your band for the rest of your life, like the Rolling Stones say.
Right.
And then you wake up one day and for one reason or another, either musical differences, people grow apart, opportunity comes a knocking for one of the members of your band, suddenly you're faced with being bandless, right? And twiddling your thumbs, wondering what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So about 11 years or so into getting out of college, where I met the Dixie Dregs, and then the Dixie Dregs were a band in that period, and then also the Steve Morse Band, it all came to a crashing halt until further notice, because Steve Morse was invited to join the group Kansas, who were reforming, and he wanted to check it out, and he certainly should have checked it out.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so that was a moment where it hit me like, wow, you mean maybe your band is not going to be there for your entire life, so it might be time to start thinking about having some other things going on. Mm-hmm. So most of the musicians that I work with are in that same kind of mode, to where you multitask. Like I looked in the mirror and said, I want to be a musician my entire life. Basically saying, I don't ever really want to work
Yeah.
a job.
You want to play?
Yeah, I want to play.
Sure.
And so in order to do that, unless you play in a band like the Rolling Stones or U2, you always have to have a lot of different things going on. And so I got heavily involved in education. So now I'm a professor of percussion at Berklee College of Music. I'll be starting. I've taught 17 and a half years there, so
wow.
Starting in about 3 weeks, I'll be going into the 18th year.
Congratulations.
And then some years ago, when they got started at the college with the online education side of things, they asked me if I would like to create what I guess was going to be the world's first college course in rock drumming. So I spent the better part of a year and a half getting that together, and that's up and running in 12-week increments. So 4 times a year you can take this course.
Is it in fact was it the first rock and roll drum course?
I'm not familiar with anything like it, really. I think Berklee might be the first music institution that kind of went into the drum market. So there's an Afro-Cuban course taught by Mark Walker, who's this amazing drummer. The co-chairman, the assistant chair of my department, Yaron Israel, has a course that's more of a general drumming course, and then there's also a funk drumming course.
Okay.
So that whole educational side of things, became a big part of my career, and so it's always ongoing in the midst of me, hopping a plane to fly out and either do gigs with a reformed Jazz is Dead, or last year Winger had put out a record and did about 70 some odd shows. And it's interesting, when you put 3 or 4 or 5 bands from that era together, they call it the hair band era.
Yeah.
You put it together, all of a sudden it becomes a happening, and you can draw enormous crowds. They're funny. On your own, not so big, but turn it into like a 50s twist revival with Chubby Checker and whatever. They get big crowds too. So it's really a lot of fun to get together with Winger, because we're all very good friends, And the music, when we do records, it's not throw together records. I mean, every song is a standout. You know, a lot of care and effort is put into these recordings. And I mean, at this point, Kip Winger spends most of his time writing classical music. And in fact, I took my girlfriend a few years ago to San Francisco, and we sat like, you know, 10th row in the San Francisco Opera House and watched the San Francisco Ballet Company dance to Kip Winger's ballet called Ghosts.
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, and then they came and did it at the Koch Theater in Lincoln Center in New York, and so we went again.
How'd you get hooked up with Kip?
Let's see. In my second career crisis, the first one when the Dregs and Steve Morse band ended, that was in I take it back. That was the crisis.
Okay.
It was 1986. My wife and I had been living in Atlanta, Georgia, and so now with no band, it's kind of like, wow, do you stay in Atlanta, Georgia, or do you go to one of the main cities, you know, that are hubs of music, Nashville, LA, or New York?
Right.
And since both my wife Michelle and I were from New York, we just moved back, but this time, instead of being out on Long Island, where we grew up, we just moved into New York City to see what that would be like. And I don't recommend it to anyone who's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, because New York City can be
yeah, a little overwhelming.
It can be a very oppressive, scary place.
Yeah.
You know, it's beautiful when you eventually wake up and smell the roses and go, oh my God, like this is my home for the time being.
So you need to get established though.
And so I just started pounding the pavement. You know, I had a name as a drummer, and so other musicians, you know, were, you know, into getting together to jam. And so I met a lot of different musicians that way, did a lot of auditions that I didn't get most of them.
Really?
I mean, that's a whole other side of things, interesting stories, and I think it's really good for, you know, up-and-coming musicians that hope to have careers in the music business should understand that, you know, it's okay to not pass the audition.
Right.
As discouraging as it could be, or as difficult as it could be, accepting the fact that someone thinks you suck or just not right.
Or just passed you over.
For the gig.
Yeah.
It's important to go through auditions to kind of learn the ins and outs of them, and eventually the right thing will come your way.
Right.
So it was through this process in 1986 and 1987, when I was just going to cattle call auditions, and one thing leads to another, I ended up in the offices of a Japanese management company called Amuse America. It was their American division. They had called me about possibly playing drums on a tour with one of their artists who, when New Age music was big in the 80s, their artist was Kitaro, who was a very famous New Age keyboard player. And he was about to do a 5-week US tour. And so I went to their offices to talk about doing the gig. And they said, oh, you know, we just found out Kitaro flew from Japan into LA, and he's decided to just pick all LA-based musicians, so we're sorry. You know, so I thanked them and said, hey, just keep me in mind if anything else comes your way. And as I was leaving, I heard some heavy metal music coming from one of the rooms in the offices, and they saw that, you know, it piqued my interest, and they said, oh, hey, let us introduce you. We're letting 2 local musicians use our 8-track machine. They're doing demos, and we're trying to help them get a record deal. They've been rejected by every New York label twice already, and now they're writing songs for their 3rd go-around. So I walk in the room, and I don't know who these guys are. It's Kip Winger and Reb Beach, the lead guitarist. And the song that was playing, I remember it to this day, was Madeleine, which was the lead-off song on the first Winger album, you know, a year or 2 later, and it was our first video and first hit, you know, album, radio hit. So it was a very funny meeting of these 2 people, because Kip didn't know who I was, but Reb Beach was a Dixie Dregs fan and a Steve Morse fanatic, and he was almost shaking, right? Going, Kip, you don't know who this is. This is the drummer from the Dixie Dregs. And I'm standing there going, yeah, I'm an unemployed drummer looking for the next thing, hopefully, to come together for me.
Kind of a strange situation.
But right? I mean, you can't let people know, like, you're having, this war going on in your head, like, oh my God, am I ever going to find another thing?
You're Rod Morgenstein.
Right. So, Kip said, hey man, I don't know who you are, but, look at Reb, he's all, girly and stuff, and intimidated. You like this music that you hear? I said, I grew up on rock. I took a left turn into the world of fusion for the past, 15 years, but I'd love to get back to my rock roots. So he said, look, we're determined. We keep getting rejected by record labels, but we're going to get a record deal because we're not going to stop until we do. And he said, I have a list of 20 or 30 of the New York guys that go to every cattle call audition of rock bands, and that's what we were going to do when we got a deal. But if you're interested, let's get together and jam.
Cool.
So I said, sure. So we got together and jammed, and that's how it started. Now, when I went to the audition, I had kind of, picked up a lot of tips from the various rock musicians I had been jamming with since I had moved to New York in that year.
Right.
And a lot of them were kind of telling me I'm clueless. Like, you might be a very good fusion jazz kind of player, but like in rock, it's not about constantly playing 3 against 4 and 4 against 3 and 2 against 3 and 3 against 2 and like playing over the bar line and doing odd note groupings and it's this insane stuff. It's fun, but when you're laying down a groove to a pumping bass line that's going and thinking about an arena full of fans just and head bashing, you don't do polyrhythms. And that's it's like you just lay down.
Right.
That's what the music's crying out for. Don't think it's stupid because you've heard that beat endless times before. Just recognize that it has value, just as the crazy stuff that you do has value in other styles of music.
Yeah.
So when I went into the Winger audition, that's what I did, because the first thing Kip did, he started pumping on the bass, and so that's what I did. It was funny though, because he then stopped and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing what I think's appropriate." And he went, yeah, great. Reb said, "You can lose us, like you can play over the bar line and do crazy
and that's all
stuff."
you needed, I'm guessing.
I said, "Why?" "Well, yeah, I love to do that, but I'm intentionally not doing it because I don't want to scare you away." And he said, "No, I see you can hit hard and rock out. That's great, but we want Winger to not just be like Bon Jovi or Def Leppard or Rat or all of those were the bands that dominated the charts back then. You opened up Billboard and 15 of the 20 top 20 records were rock bands.
Yep.
So he said, we need to look for angles that can make Winger different. And so if we have a drummer who can rock, but who can also do things that people never hear rock drummers do because it's just not in their vocabulary, that's what we want. So show me what you got. I went, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah, I can imagine inside how you were feeling.
And so there are songs on every Winger record where I get to open things up. Headed for a Heartbreak has a long, crazy drum thing at the end of it. Rainbow and the Rose on the second record has a similar thing. Then the third record has a whole, primal drum thing at the end that goes on for a minute or more. And then there's always some kind of unusual proggy drum solo piece in the live shows. Mm-hmm. And then since Kip has always been into classical music and just loves, all of these different tonalities, he tries to work that in to the music. So, Winger is maybe not so much now as back in the fall of from grace of all the metal bands when Winger, was made fun of.
Right.
We were not a 3-chord, straight ahead, party, oompa rock band. There were always these other muso elements in the music. But the thing is, if you want to get a record deal, you have to study the music that is on the charts and getting played on the radio, and then you have to figure out how you can hold on to your integrity, but also, offer something that seems to be the flavor of the time. Otherwise, you're not going to get a record deal unless you're one of the handful of bands that have somehow broken through despite that. So you have Rush, that never really played the game, and Dream Theater, who for most of their career have not played the game. It's like, no, this is who we are, take it or leave it. And just through attrition, years of just keeping on the path, you get the word of mouth out there because radio is not playing you. In the case of Rush,
right.
Yes, at this point, but not in the first few years of Rush's career did, radio fought them. But when arenas of people just keep coming to see a band, eventually radio has to fold.
Acquiesce.
Because people are calling, screaming, going, "Why aren't you playing Tom Sawyer? Spirit of the radio."
Yeah.
So, but so for everybody else, it's kind of like, whoa, we need to do something that's fitting the format of what radio is playing and what record labels are signing.
Which is an art form in and of itself,
right?
All right, so I'd like to go back, Rod, if you don't mind. Let's go backwards, because the way I got into you and your music was through the Dregs and the Dixie Dregs. How did that come about? And I know it's probably a long story, but if you can give it to me in a nutshell.
Sure, okay. Every musician that has a career of any kind will be able to cite 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 moments in their life that changed their life, like a decision that they made that they didn't really give a whole big picture thought to, but just eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'll do that. And so I had chosen after high school to go to a community college on Long Island. And when I was getting ready to finish the second year and wanted to get a bachelor's degree, the teacher that I looked up to said, "Where are you going for your 3rd and 4th years?" I said, "I don't know, one of the music colleges, I guess." And he said, "You should go to the University of Miami." And I said, "Why should I go there? I never even heard of it." He said, "Because I went there and they have a great music program." So because of that teacher, I went to the University of Miami. Now, I was also a piano player. I was always a better drummer, but I always had this thing with piano and maybe thinking it might be another direction to go in. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to take courses in piano and study with the jazz piano teacher. And I was in an improvisation class, 101, where I was one of only maybe 2 or 3 piano players, but a dozen or more guitarists. And I kept admiring this one student who was the only student that didn't play a fat, hollow-bodied Gibson guitar with all the treble off. He had long blonde hair. He played this Telecaster body that was all beat up with a Stratocaster neck and Gibson frets, and had all these pickups on it. And the teacher was always yelling at him because he didn't sound like a jazz guitarist playing all the patterns out of the jazz pattern scale books
right.
that everybody was learning from. And one day that guy came up to me and said, "Hey, somebody told me you play the drums. Can you fill in for my drummer who hurt himself surfing?" So I said, "Sure." So it's Steve Morse. He was the guitarist. I go to the band rehearsal, and it's the same lineup as the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and they're doing Mahavishnu Orchestra cover songs, and then Steve Morse originals that are like a little bit more easy listening versions,
right?
Like Mahavishnu Orchestra. So that was the only music I was listening to back then. So I was freaking out in a good way. And then the other drummer eventually bowed out of things. He was a great player, but more of a rock player, not a fusion guy.
Remember who that was?
Yeah, Art Yarnold. And in fact, I had dinner with him last July. He's still like a champion surfer. Lives in New Jersey.
Wow.
I hadn't seen him in years, so it was really nice to reconnect. So that's how I got involved with Steve Morse and the Dixie Dregs. And so, you know, in terms of how does a career happen or not, a lot of times it's just a minor decision that you make or a choice you make that is so insignificant at the time. The fact that, okay, I like my teacher, he says I should go to that college. And then I end up in a class with someone who will become a bandmate of mine and change both of our lives in our band by getting our first record deal and, you know, doing 6 records before we disbanded for the time being, and get 4 of those records were nominated for Grammys. I think we really created the rock instrumental Grammy category, because there were no rock instrumental bands. A lot of other bands would throw in an instrumental song to fill up.
Right.
You know, like
right.
we need a song that's really just a one-note jam. So Paul McCartney did it 1 year, the Police did it 2 years, a Flock of Seagulls did it 1 year, and those were all the people that we lost to. But it was nice being nominated and getting to go to the Grammy Awards and hang. And then in you know, when the band reformed some years later, the next 2 albums also were nominated for Grammys. So we like to refer to ourselves as 6-time Grammy losers.
So when these insignificant decisions that you make can have a huge impact on your career, and you know it because you're intelligent and you get it. A lot of people may not get that. Does that make you second guess yourself all the time?
Not all the time, but I will periodically have moments wondering, wow, you know, if I didn't go to Nassau Community College, I wouldn't have met Steve Morse.
What about future, like, you know, decisions you have to make on a day-to-day basis? Do you think about that? Like, this could go either way, or do you?
Sure, but I don't let it really impress upon me too heavily.
Okay.
Like, again, like just a funny series of events has led to me and a musician friend of mine writing music for American Pickers.
Oh, cool. Love that show.
Now, unbeknownst to me, you know, a show like that in the course of a season uses thousands of original pieces of music. I didn't even know most of these shows have music, but it's like, hey, let's go check out that piece. Let's get in the car. Okay, now there's music playing.
Yeah.
So somebody's writing that music. And, you know, a year ago when I was eating in my local breakfast place, the owner said, hey, my son-in-law, my niece's husband, he's a fan of yours and he wants to meet you. And then I meet the guy, and very nice guy. He was a very successful sound engineer, and then with you know, technology making it possible for everybody to have their own recording studio.
Sure.
They don't need to go to $1 million studio.
You need a computer.
And pay whatever it costs to have like this engineer. He's had to reinvent myself, so he started a little company with a partner in trying to do original music. And so a year ago, you know, he said, so would you like to write original music, but we don't have any work, but we can just start building up your portfolio. And I said, no, of course not. Like, why would I at this stage of the game in my career just spend endless hours writing music that might not be used for anything?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
So he said, I get it. So I was in the shop eating breakfast a year later, you know, in the spring, and he walked in, he said, you're not going to believe it, we have our first, you know, work, and we need a lot of music. So, you know, we'll see what it pans out. It's not like my partner and I are writing the theme song, right? It's just we keep writing music and submitting it for hopefully uses throughout the program.
Has it been aired at all? That you know of?
I don't even know if the new season has started yet. Because this is all just begun. But so anyway, in answer to your question about thinking about things, it's my hope that perhaps embarking on this new thing that we're doing, we're just trying to churn out these 1.5 minute original pieces of music as fast as we can, that maybe it will lead eventually to something where, you know, a cable show or a movie or a TV show needs a theme song. You know, and we'll get involved with that. And my friend is a big scorer and knows how to do orchestration. So anyway, so it's exciting that this kind of came out of nowhere. And you know, you have to turn on the creative chops fast, because like, hey, give us 10 original things, you know, so you sit and go, and I can sort of, you know, make my way around a guitar and just come up with, you know, like, and there it is.
Yep.
You're on your way.
Cool.
Like, okay, you know, but give us something more like you know, a train beat. You know, okay. And then another one gets.
So is all that just floating around in your head all the time? I mean, you have years and years of that stuff?
Kind of.
Yeah?
Yeah. From now will be the 40-year reunion
Yeah.
of that album, Freefall. And it came out in 1977. That was the first commercially released Dixie
How
Dregs.
old were you then?
I was 24.
Okay.
I was 24. And, you know, the way the Dregs got a record deal was, and it's another one of those right place, right time moments. We were playing a club in Nashville, Tennessee called the Exit Inn. We were paid $100 to drive up from Atlanta, Georgia to do it. And when we were on stage, someone in the band recognized a famous musician sitting at the bar having a beer. And it was Chuck Leavell, the piano player from the Allman Brothers.
Right.
So this is 1976. The Allman Brothers were one of the biggest bands in America. And so after our set, Chuck came over to us and said, "Who are you guys and where can I buy your records?" And we said, "We don't have a record deal," you know? So he said, "You do now." And he opened the door to us, for us, to Capricorn Records, which was owned and run by a man by the name of Phil Walden,
Yep.
who 1 month later, the Dregs had a date booked to play in Macon, Georgia. And Phil Walden, the president, brought all of his vice presidents and secretaries and workers, and everybody from the label came out to see the band that Chuck Leavell was talking about. And Chuck happened to be off the road, so he came and sat in with us. We did Jessica
Oh, cool.
by the Allman Brothers.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was it.
That's awesome.
That's what kick-started the whole thing.
Another one of those fluky moments.
And so, you know, so the message in that is, okay, if you're a musician with a dream, you hope to make it, just play out in front of people whenever possible, because you never know who might be in that facility at that moment who could possibly change your life. Whether it's someone like a Chuck Leavell who helped us get a record deal, or it's someone looking for a drummer or a guitarist.
You just never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
And things like that do happen.
Yeah. What what kind of advice, like, what would be one giant piece of advice you give your drum students that you could share with me now?
I tell them that when you have a passion for something, you have to go for it. Go into it with realistic, not aspirations, but just with a realistic outlook in terms of the fact that there's no rhyme or reason to success. Talented people make it, talented people don't make it. Untalented people or people with limited abilities don't make it, but they also make it. And a lot of it just has to do with catching those lucky breaks. But the only way you can maybe have it happen is if you follow your dreams and go for it. And it's not an easy road. When I look back on some of the trials and tribulations and say the early days of the Dixie Dregs, where you're all crammed into a truck, and you're sleeping illegally in the back on the gear with maybe a sleeping bag and going down the street, and then the axle falls out of the truck, and then you have to siphon gas, and someone has to go hitch for 8 hours before they come back with the right stuff to rebuild under the all this kind of stuff. And you have these moments saying, why am I doing this? I mean, I could get a degree in business and be making a really good living, but you can't, because you're a musician.
You have that drive.
You have to do it and eat crow with the hope that if you do it long enough, sooner or later, things are going to inch along and a career will happen.
That's good advice. Yeah, I think that's probably good advice, not just for the music business, but for life in general.
I owe a lot to my parents, who from from the day we all watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, it might have been February, that defined my life. It was like, I want to do that, and I want to play drums, and they were 100% behind me, as they are today. Like I told you, last night, there they were, my two 92-year-old parents, sitting at B.B. King's in New York City, watching their son.
And what did you feel seeing them? What was going on inside you?
I always have a choked up moment, when they're there. But it's like the 200th time they've seen me play. Yeah. They've been to almost every concert I've ever played in the New York area.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, parents these days, I think, don't back their kids as much as maybe they should.
Well, I mean, it's out of concern because, the unfortunate reality is like, there's only so many spots to be taken for a career in the creative arts.
Yeah.
And, with information technology and the ability for everybody to be their own engineer and producer, there are so many more musicians out there. All you have to do is go on YouTube and just look at the millions and millions of clips of bands or singers or whoever, all over the world. Well, I mean, there's only so much opportunity available. There's only so many clubs in a town or
it's the law of supply and demand, like anything else. There's only so much demand, and a huge supply. Yeah.
Huge.
Questions, if I can. You just sound checked. We came back in here, and I said it sounded great, and you said, well, maybe not so much for me. So how do you know when you're in the moment? How do you know when
a musician knows when they're in the zone? They know. It's like where you can't do any wrong. You're looking at your arms and legs, and they're doing it on their own. Just for me, it's more the exception than the rule in terms of when I feel on my game.
Right.
And part of that is I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Whenever I present myself to the public, whether it's playing live or on a recording or in a course that I designed or a drum book, I proof and reproof and re-reproof and re until I can't find a mistake. And unfortunately, when you play live, you won't know until you're in that moment. So I'll feel good for some of the show. Other parts, I don't know. Maybe the stars aren't lined up the way they're supposed to be. When you feel like everything's happening right. Maybe I need to warm up more. Maybe because the last 4 shows were 3 bill shows with Jefferson Starship and Quicksilver Messenger Service, we only got to play like 40 minutes. Tonight we'll get to play like 2 hours, and so probably in the second hour I'll start to feel good.
Cool. Yeah. Rod, I really appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough, and I'm looking forward to the show a lot.
Okay,
Yes,
dude.
Thanks
Appreciate
a lot.
it.
All right.